Hey everyone, Gov back with you here. Today I'd like to spend some time in this video comparing some microphones that I'm using in the rehearsal/studio space with my band Facedown. In the band we've had a mismatch of microphones being used here for a while. Some of them good, some of them not so good. So to try to remedy that and to do it without breaking the bank, I purchased some new mics, namely the Behringer XM8500 and their other model, the XM1800. Now before I start, I want to make one thing really clear. I'm not an audio engineer or professional producer, nor am I even a professional musician. I do this for fun. And I'm a drummer in a cover band, and I really like to mess around with recording and mixing music. It's one of the hobbies that I enjoy a lot. But what I do think is that I'm a typical consumer of this type of microphone. Someone who needs reliability, flexibility with studio recording and live reinforcement, and needs to do it all for spending as little cash as possible. So with that, I'm going to go through a couple different things. We'll talk about how I came about discovering the Behringers, and we'll also go into some tests here that I came up with. Don't know how scientific they'll be or practical they'll be, but let's give it a shot and see what we come up with. So I recently had a discussion with a good musician friend of mine about what mics he is using in the studio, as well as for the gigs that he's playing. We discussed some mid-range condenser and dynamic mics, things like the Sennheiser E825, an Audio-Technica AT2020. It's also using an MXL 990 and a Shure SM57B. And then we discussed the usual suspects too, the go-to microphones in the industry, the Shure SM57 as well as the SM58. But what really intrigued me about his experience was that he recently discovered the Behringer mic that is the XM8500. And he claimed that it was comparable to that old standby of the SM58. What intrigued me the most, though, was that as I looked at it, the XM8500 is a fifth of the cost of that Shure SM58, coming in at $19.95. So I was skeptical at first. How can a microphone that inexpensive be as comparable to something 5 times its price in the SM58? So those of you who know that SM58, you might be skeptical too. So I want to do this comparison and see what we can come up with. So that SM58 is already what I think many others considered as an affordable, all-around utilitarian microphone. It's very capable for many applications. You can pair it with its cousin, the SM57, and you should have all the microphone needs for either recording in a small studio like I have here, or reinforcing a cover band like I have out in bars and doing gigs. And you can do all that within, I think, a pretty reasonable budget. They're around $100 each, depending on where you get them. So that brings me to today's video. It's a comparison of that XM8500 as well as the 1800 with both the SM58 and the SM57. I also have a PG58 from Shure, so we'll add that into the mix too to compare with. Okay, so let's take a look at the mics that we did order in here. So we'll start with the XM8500. It does come with one of these plastic cases, which is really nice. So let's all go ahead and open it up. The Behringer did come with one of these cases. It's got the foam inside. First thing we do here is when I pick it up, I notice that it does have a good microphone feel. It's got some weight to it, so it feels solid, like it's got some nice construction. The screen up top here, you can see obviously is black, but it's fairly typical. So yep, there it is, the Behringer. Ultra Voice is their brand name with the XM8500 as the model number. So what we can do here is take a look at the Shure, and here's one of my Shure SM58s. And so very similar weight. In fact, the Shure is probably a little heavier, so the construction of the main body here is a little heavier duty. But other than that, if we put them side by side, you can really see here that pretty similar, right? So you can tell that the Behringer is modeled off of what I think is probably one of the standard microphones in the industry. So moving on, if we look now at the 1800s, so let's go ahead and take a look here. I think the first thing is you get it in a package, comes with a nice little box here. I'll take a closer look at that. So we've got the 3 microphones with 3 holders. Oh yeah, by the way, the 8500 came with a holder as well. Right away when you lift one of these up, much different experience. It's not as heavy as either the Behringer 8500 or the Shure 58. Also, you can tell the screen is a little bit larger and the construction is a different shape. And we have an on-off switch here as well. Now I know the Shure SM58s come with an optional switch. I'm not sure about the Behringers, if they come with a switch or not, as far as the 8500s go. But right away you can tell it's a lighter metal here. It's probably not as heavy duty as the other ones. But if we do compare that to what I think the 1800s are trying to compete against, which is this Shure PG58. So I've got a couple here. This is part of the mismatch for the band. It's picking this up. It's a very similar weight to these two over here. So it's got that heavier duty metal construction for the main body there. Whereas if you pick up the Behringer, you can tell it's a little bit of a lighter and maybe a less expensive microphone. So I'm not expecting much out of those 1800s. As I mentioned earlier, you can get them in a 3-pack for around $40 or $39.95, depending on where you find them. So at that price point, I think they are, meant to compete with that PG line, the things meant for public speaking and speeches and those type of things. But we're going to take a listen and see what happens. Maybe it'll work out well for the music that I typically record here. So when I decided to look at these Behringer mics, I also decided it would be interesting to try and document my experience. I think, one, we want to make sure that we can make it as practical, if not even a little scientifical while we do it. And also as in an experiment, as I can work with the skills that I have and the tools that I have available to me. Two, we want to have some fun messing around with the different ways to compare these mics and maybe do it in a way that some other folks haven't thought to do it. And mainly for me, I don't really know any better, right? I don't have that burden of education or knowledge on how to do it from a technical point of view. So I'm just going to come up with a couple experiments and see if it works. Okay, so here we are looking at the first test I did to compare microphones. What I did is just set up the microphones, and I did it for all 5 of them. And this PG58's in there now. It's the last one to do. And I set them up at the same location, angled in the same way, at the same height, in front of one of my studio monitors. And then I played the same track at the same volume into those microphones and recorded the input. Replicating what maybe your ear picks up a little closer so that we don't have to have the gain boosted too much. And as I mentioned gain, I made sure that the gain was equal for all 5 recordings as well. So that's the experiment, just doing it right here on my desk, looking at positioning all 5 mics in the same place, playing the same track, and recording it. And so we'll take a look at what I did inside of Reaper, and that's my DAW that I used for this experiment, and see what we come up with, and really hear what we come up with for results. Okay, we're going to try to listen back to each individual recording of the microphones. Let's start with the SM58. Let's do the 57 now. Bit of a difference there for sure, even just between those two. About the 58 or PG. Interesting enough, not hearing much of a difference there. Now let's try the Behringers. Seems pretty different to me. Wider, a lot more frequency response. Try the 1800. A little more heavy in the mids, not as much low end. 8500. 58. All right, so for those that you might be more into visual as well as the audible, I've set up a graphic EQ here to show an RTA analysis. and I've got that on the master track, so whatever I unmute, we'll be able to see it. I tested this before I recorded it. I don't see a ton of visual. There's a little bit of changes on the high end for most of these, but those of you who maybe have a better eye for this than I do, maybe you can see some differences here and where the frequency response is happening for each of these. So I'm going to go in a little bit different order. We'll just go top to bottom. We'll start with the XM8500 from Behringer. Now the 1800. Let's try the 58. '57. And the PG. And then the original track. Obviously the stereo pan's a little different. Let's do the 8500 again. For me, the clear outlier, if you will, was the Behringer 8500. I really liked the sound that I got out of it. I liked the clarity in the highs. The mids were punching through. It had some good low response. The Shure 58s, I don't know if there's maybe something wrong with my 58s. I felt like the highs were a little dull and the mids just weren't there. It felt muddy to me. The 57, the Shure 57 was surprising to me. That one was probably the closest to the Behringer. So I really like that one as well. I'm not going to use that for voice though. I've got those on my instruments here, both in the studio here with the amps that we have, as well as when we go out on the road gigging. To me, the clear winner is the Behringer. I'd really be interested in what your thoughts are, what you heard. Leave some comments below. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already and turn that notification on. I'm really interested in what everybody thinks and what you heard from my short experiment with showing all those mics side by side or listening to those mics side by side. Talk to you soon. Ciao, ciao. This is Gov out.